All right, thank you for attending. This is the plenary session for underground facilities and infrastructure. We have three presentations that cover the work that's being done in our frontier. We will go through those and then we will take questions and have some discussion afterwards. Let me hand it off to our first presenter, Scott Hertel.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to cover two portions of our underground facilities. First, I'm going to talk about the neutrinos. So it looks like I have a significant typo on my first slide here. Sorry about that. So I'm covering UF1, which is underground facilities for the neutrino frontier. And then after that, I'll be covering underground facilities for the cosmic frontier. I want to highlight that I was not part of this. Thanks go to these people for putting together this material. So what's covered by UF1? This is facility needs for future neutrino research in an underground facility, underground environment. So long baseline neutrino facility, neutrinoless double beta decay, and facilities for natural sources. So supernova, solar, atmospheric, terrestrial also. So first, I'm going to talk about long baseline neutrino facilities and their needs for a couple of minutes. So overall, the coming decade, we've planned the coming decade, and there's ballistic plans in place here. So Hyper-K will begin its full program in about 2028. Dune phase 1 will start over this period, 2028 to 2031. You probably all are aware that the excavation is well underway for that project. So for the US program, upgrade and future strategy after that stage is what we need to consider and think about. And that's under discussion. So neutrino frontier science and dune planning will drive the requirements for those facilities. The decisions during this no-mass period will impact that time from the late 2020s and beyond. Neutrinoless double beta decay facilities, just to highlight, this is funded by the Nuclear Physics Division. Some challenges specific to this neutrinoless double beta decay field, space and depth. So the space that we currently have is sufficient for this period, this no-mass period, but we need to be planning the future period now. The depth requirements are under discussion. That's kind of an active part of the planning discussions is what are the depth requirements. Other key requirements, there can be significant needs for cryogenic support, and that includes storage and assembly space, both for liquid noble type experiments and also any experiment needs underground storage and assembly. All these experiments need environmental monitoring and cleanliness, materials assay, these general requirements for these very low background experiments. Something to highlight, we need space. Some of these experiments benefit from underground R&D, not just R&D above ground and bringing a deployed experiment underground. And lastly, just to highlight, there's significant synergy here between neutrinoless double beta decay and dark matter direct detection, and also between some types of neutrinoless double beta decay experiments and QIS research. The last category in this neutrino portion is the natural sources. So the science drivers here both probe neutrino sources, better understanding these sources of neutrinos, and also probe the fundamental physics of the neutrino sector. So cosmological properties and the flavor physics, new interactions, et cetera, of the neutrinos themselves. So what do we need for these underground facilities? We need depth. These are very low fluxes of neutrinos typically. So we need a very low background environment. We need a large space, again, because of these low fluxes, low interaction rates. So we need a large experiment hall. We also need large amounts of additional space for utilities such as liquid handling, purification of liquid, purification of other materials, cryogenics, et cetera. And some of these, you actually need underground cryogenic facilities for the R&D steps. So again, just highlighting underground R&D, not just underground deployment of a polished, finished plan. In terms of location, just wanted to highlight that geoneutrinos benefit from diverse locations in order to get full science. And again, similar, we must plan the space now for the next decade, not just for this decade, one at a time. So the summary, these are the three topics: long baseline, neutrinos double beta K, and natural sources. HEP is investigating in long baseline neutrino science, and DUNE will be occupying underground space for the next decade plus. Future neutrino experiments beyond the 2020s will require advanced planning, starting now. The cosmic frontier. So I am a part of this subgroup, and I want to thank the other people who have contributed to gathering this information and putting this together. The topics here. So again, we're trying to understand facility needs, specifically facility needs for future cosmic frontier research in underground facilities. So this boils down to, in practical terms, direct detection of dark matter in these underground facilities. And there's three major categories of experiment technologies that we broke it down into: noble liquid detector experiments, cryogenic bolometer experiments, and this other category. Again, the main motivation here is GeV to TeV mass dark matter for noble liquids. Sorry, I'm going to talk about noble liquids the next 3 slides. Specifically for noble liquids, it's GeV to TeV mass dark matter via nuclear recoils as the primary science driver. However, these technologies have significant sensitivity to a lot of other channels for new physics. The future projects at a planning stage, just kind of listing what are the ideas that are in place. So there's a liquid xenon consortium, XLZD, which is planning a large-scale liquid xenon that has been called G3 in the DOE process. And then there's also a liquid argon effort that would have a similar G3 scale sensitivity. And these are both a late 2020s, 2030 timescale. There's also projects that are at a concept stage. So there's a liquid argon experiment focusing on a lower dark matter mass sensitivity at a smaller mass scale here. And there's also the Alethea project, which is a liquid helium TPC. Thanks. So what do these projects need from a facility? The main challenge here is we're moving to larger and larger scales. That's the main challenge. So what is the facility? How does the facility need to adapt to hosting larger liquid noble experiments? Obviously, space is the first thing you think of. So a large cavern, large experimental cavern, but additionally large underground staging areas. Sometimes just simply storing the gas before the experiment starts can occupy a huge amount of underground space. And there's a significant motivation to store that gas underground to avoid cosmogenic activation. Also, these experiments need assembly underground. So this is a little bit of a phase change. The larger the experiment, the more of the assembly, especially the final assembly, needs to occur underground. So as we move to this even larger scale, we're not able to move the time projection chamber underground as a piece. We have to bring it underground in pieces. We have to have large volumes We have to have cranes and hoisting. We have to have that much cleaner of an environment, both in radon and dust, for those assembly steps. So this is one of the things we really wanted to highlight, was the assembly challenge underground is a significant step more demanding of the facility at these larger scales. Thanks. More challenges to moving to larger scales. These larger experiments, they produce heat in the cooling and in the gas handling and the circulation and possibly the distillation. We need to make sure these labs can handle those heat loads and the removal of those heats. The large volumes of cryogens mean that we need large degree of safety and control. The handling, this is a topic outside the liquid noble. These experiments rely on additional technologies, room temperature scintillators, or Cherenkov detectors. Many people in the community want a liquid scintillator for this purpose, and this involves working with the lab to make sure the liquid scintillator is approved and safely handled at all steps. This is not strictly liquid nobles, but it's largely related. So there are coming experiments that are large bubble chamber experiments for dark matter direct detection. So the Pico 500, Pico 5 ton, this subsequent experiment, and also in parallel work on the scintillating bubble chamber technology, which is aiming for a ton scale experiment. So these have some similar facility requirements as a standard liquid noble experiment. I want to highlight this target liquid, of course, is at pressure and in a superheated metastable state. And it's something for the pressure vessel and for the safety. It requires significant interface and significant cooperation and contribution between the experiment and the facility to make sure that the safety and the engineering and everything is handled well for these pressure vessels. Moving on to cryogenic Volometer technologies. So these in general focus at a lighter dark matter mass, typically sub GeV, roughly speaking. And they're growing in importance and visibility in the field. So it's reasonable to expect that there may be some modest growth in the number of cryogenic Volometer experiments that are deployed over the next 10 years. I want to really emphasize this change in philosophy that's going on here between needing an underground facility purely for the WIMP search. And more, we need an underground facility in order to complete the R&D stage before we can call the R&D complete. There's a few reasons for that. Partly it's because of these heat-only events that are currently limiting many of these low temperature technologies, and which are much easier to study in a well-shielded underground environment. But also the colder you get, the slower the detector response gets in general. There's two models for enabling this R&D step that really benefits from an underground location. One model is simply earlier deployment of the experiment fridge for specific experiments. Another model is a shared, shielded, and underground user facility where experiments come in and deploy some R&D, and then another experiment comes in on that same dilution fridge and shared infrastructure. Just highlighting that these two modes are both ways that can enable that underground R&D. Lastly, I wanted to highlight that there's growing synergy between these Volometer-based experiments and QIS work. And so it's possible to imagine shared facilities in the future, especially if QIS finds them highly beneficial for their uses to be underground. That might happen in the next 10 years, and we might see a real increased cooperation on facilities between QIS and dark matter low temperature experiments. What do these experiments really require, though, in terms of a facility? Compared to the liquid noble experiments, they're comparatively small in footprint, but comparatively sensitive to the environmental factors around them in the facility. They're at their core, all of these experiments are based on a dilution fridge, which has a fairly standardized size and dimensions, plus some shielding around that dilution fridge. The considerations, the dilution fridge has a certain height requirement. There's a depth overburden, a floor vibration, and an E&M environment, which are each specific, highly specific to the experiment under question, under consideration. So this is actually one of the reasons why underground R&D is important, is because it's difficult to even set these requirements until you're underground, until you're at a situation similar to your final experiment. Now we get to the other technologies. So there are a lot of very interesting and compelling technologies here. If you look at this list and you think about them, all of these technologies are for now relatively compact in footprint and relatively robust to the environment of the lab. None of these are as sensitive as the Volometer experiments to the vibration or the E&M environment. So it's a little bit interesting that we can actually group these together in that they're all fairly robust to these points. Depth is the main requirement for them. So here are some comments that are in common both to the UF1 and the UF2 portions of the talk. All of these projects require some robust on-site computing and network infrastructure. All of these requirements require robust utilities like electrical power, cooling abilities, etc. All the scientists that need to access the experiment need to be able to access that experiment. I hope that goes without saying. Emphasizing some points that aren't actually in our little portion, but are covered more by UF4. Underground material assay facilities are essential to all of these projects succeeding. Underground material production and machining and handling and distillation, et cetera, can be essential for specific experiments. And I just want to call out one more thing here, which is that the personnel of the facility are extremely important, right? The facility is not just a geography or a building or an empty space. It has people, and those people can really, in my experience, make an experiment happen. They can be extremely beneficial to making the project succeed. So I just wanted to make sure that was called out here. The current program for a Cosmic Frontier has these two G2 experiments, Super CDMS and LZ. Recently, the Dark Matter New Initiatives projects have started in their pre-project phase. Two of those specifically are underground, the Tesseract project and Oscura. Looking forward, the Cosmic Frontier science priorities will drive experiments and those facility needs beyond this timescale. And of course, underground facility development is required prior to experiment construction. So what space is on the horizon, or what space are we thinking about? So there's this possibility of temporary occupancy at one of the LBNF caverns prior to Dune requiring that space. So I just want to call out that these are really large spaces. The schedule is really right around the corner. But it has a deadline, right? So it might start very soon, but it might have the deadline for when the cosmic frontier would need to vacate that space is something to think about. So SURF is advocating for additional excavation, taking advantage of that excavation infrastructure that's already on site, already constructing these caverns. So there would be a significant cost savings because of that kind of uninterrupted work. There are proposals at both the 4850 and deeper depths. The schedule, the excavation might start as soon as 2024. And I want to highlight this document if you want to learn more about those proposals. SNOLAB also has proposals for similarly significant expansion of their underground space. And they're specifically highlighting gas storage space and tailoring around the needs of specific projects. This has been conceived as 2 expansions, staged 5-year periods. My last slide, summary. The multiple new dark matter experiments are expected and being planned. And on Monday's talks from the lab leadership, we heard that facilities are currently full or could be considered currently full. So there's a clear need for additional underground space tailored to the needs of these experiments that we're imagining beyond the late 2020s. This underground space should be tailored around the needs of those experiments, specifically large spaces for large experiments, like with Noble in particular, and then smaller spaces for smaller scale experiments, both the cryogenic volometer and others. There's a significant need for these underground radon-free clean rooms for the assembly stages, for handling the materials, which will be a bigger and bigger part of the experiments as they progress to the larger scales. We need these large areas for staging and experiment utilities. And that's where I'll stop. Thank you.
All right, as I said, we will go through our presentations and have questions and discussion after we're finished. So I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Alvin Kamaha, and she'll be talking about supporting capabilities and synergistic research in underground facilities.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Alvin Kamaha. I'm an assistant professor at UCLA, and I mainly work on the LZ dark matter search experiment. But today I'll be talking to you as a co-convener of the underground facility supporting capability group. And I will be giving this talk on behalf of my other co-convener, Brianna Mount from the Black Hills State University and Richard Skinney from the School of Mine and Technology. Right, so I'm going to be giving a report on UF4, and I'm also going to have a report on UF5 concerning synergetic research in the underground facility at the end of my talk. So to start then, because I'm going to be talking about 2 topical groups, I'm going to split my presentation into 2 categories with introduction and conclusion for both groups separately. And I'm going to end with a summary. I'll mainly be focusing on UF4 reports, where we're talking about the need for clean room and radon-reduced space for underground science, the need for assay and the availability of current facilities underground, and other needs such as the on-site machining and detector fabrication. So an introduction to UF4 for those who are not familiar with that topical group. As you know, for the science we do underground, we need a tremendous amount of supporting capability in order to be able to conduct that science. And to this effect, the UF underground facility is divided into many topical groups. You have heard from Scott Hertel about UF1 and UF2. UF4 then is geared toward the supporting capability of those underground facility. And what we do, we have the goal to evaluate the asset of currently existing underground facilities and compare those assets with the need of current and future experiment in order to bridge the gap between the supply side and the demand. And again, it was to be able to ensure that the low background radioactive environment that is needed for some of the rare event science that we do, for instance, the dark matter and the neutrino physics, is well covered in those supporting capability. So the approach we had then for the UF4 topical group was to send out 2 surveys to the community, one to the experiment site, current and future experiment, and another one to the facility site. The link to the surveys are there, and we are still accepting some late response if needed. So then the survey respondent on the facility, on the experiment side are listed here. There, you can see that we had a broad response from different experiments in dark matter and neutronless double beta decay physics. For instance, Kamla-Zen, Super-Kamukende, Darwin, and so forth. And as I said, after we have written the report, we sent our draft report to the community in order to get some feedback before we make the final report public. Then we had additional notes. We had additional input from some experiments who have sent a late response. That is why they are not listed here. But what we are going to be doing, we are going to have a live editing of our draft report tomorrow. I think it's at 10 a.m. So for those interested in participating live, they can join us. But we are going to ensure that even the late survey response that we have are included in the final version of the report. Then in terms of facility side, you can see that we had also a very good coverage of the different underground facility worldwide responding to our survey, plus some surface lab as well. So we were in that way sure that our survey response and then the analysis and the conclusion we were going to draw from the survey were not going to be biased to a certain demographic. Now, going into the survey response then and the analysis we made to draw some conclusion, I'm going to focus on 3 things: the clean room need, radon reduced space need, assay need, and other supporting capability. But before that, I want to step a little back and then give you some motivation why we decided to approach the survey that way. For those who are not maybe familiar with surface contamination, we were caring about the underground clean room environment or surface clean room environment is because the ambient air within which we are right now has some dust and some radons, and those dust particulates can be radioactive. And if they are radioactive, then they will emit some of the radioactive isotopes that will lead to some nuclear or electronic recall background in our detector, for instance, in the case of the LZ or liquid xenon TPC. In solid state detector though, dust is still a concern because it may create some short that will create some failure mode in those detectors. So for this reason, then we needed some underground space, either above ground or underground. But as Scott just said, given the larger and larger size of the detector, we are going to be wanting to build in the future to probe lower and lower sensitivity. We may be geared toward focusing on underground clean room instead of above ground clean room because there will be some difficulty in transporting those TPC underground. Now for the radon reduced room is almost the same story as the radon in the air will plate out to the detector surfaces and lead again to the same type of background for instance, liquid xenon detectors. So then given that motivation, the survey results are as follows. You can see on this pie chart here that most demand from future experiments are as we expect, where they will be satisfied by an ISO 6 or 7 clean room, but some constraint from those larger detectors that are trying to probe higher and higher, lower and lower sensitivity, then are more stringent on the background, are requiring some constraint on the clean room size ISO 5 and up. And then I just want to explain here that the legend here as a clean room class is smaller in digit, it means a lower and lower concentration of dust in the room. So for instance, class 1, we have lower concentration in the room than class 1,000. Or class 10,000, right? So then I was saying that we have had, in general, experiment requiring class 6 or class 7 ISO clean room, but some experiment like those G3 dark matter detectors or solid state detectors, because of the germanium growth on the ground or fabrication on the ground, were requiring a better clean room class. Then what we have done also, because we wanted to make sure that we survey also the clean room class with the size of the clean room that was requested, is to have the different experiment fill in what is the needed clean room size, the one versus the clean room class. And you can see here that the most of the demand, I don't know if I can focus. No, I can't. I don't know what I did. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we can see that most of the demands were basically on clean room that are already available, like a small size clean room with higher ISO class, but there are a few demands again from those experiments have spoken about that were requiring large clean room with smaller or with better ISO class that are not currently available. And here, just to make you see, this is one of the tables that is in our report showing the different clean room space worldwide with the clean room size and then the ISO class. You can see that most of these clean room in general have a footprint of less than 100 meters square, with an ISO class of 7. So given then the demand of an experiment like a kiloton liquid xylon TPC that will require like a 200 meter square clean footprint with an ISO class of 5, we can then conclude that future experiment will benefit from an additional large size clean room with better ISO class. And again, given the concern of those experiments to be able to, one, reduce the background, and second, be able to model the background that they are going to have from different sources, there were also a request to improve the monitoring of those clean room class in terms of dust, fallout, and so forth. And there was also a request that if the increase in monitoring effort was implemented, then they could perhaps loosen the requirement in terms of clean room class. So the existing clean room could be good as they are right now. Then moving on to the radon reduced clean room need for the future experiment, again, we can see that most of the experiments are fine with what is currently available in terms of radon concentration in a typical underground laboratory, that is about 100 becquerel per meter cube. But again, few experiments would like to have at least 5 millibecquerel per meter cube of radon concentration in the clean room during the construction phase, which is the most critical phase of the experiment, as the experiment surface is exposed to the radon progeny plated in the room. So from there again, we compare this table again is in our report. We compare the table of currently available radon reduced clean room across every underground facility in the world. And as you can see here, actually, the radon reduced clean room that are available are less than 100 meters square. So for a kiloton, again, liquid xenon TPC, that requires like 200 meters square footprint for its construction on the ground. We actually need to have a new facility being built or modify currently existing facility. For instance, the one at Snow Lab, maybe to make it meet this criteria of lower radon concentration clean room. Now, this is the conclusion I have just said about, increasing the larger clean room with lower radon concentration for future experiments, and also increasing the monitoring effort into the radon concentration and radon progeny plate out. Now I'm going to quickly move on to the assay need for future experiment and the availability. What I want to say first of all is that I'm seeing so many faces that have participated to the Cosmic Frontier group. So the Cosmic Frontier group was writing this calibration and background for dark matter direct detection. The UF Frontier also contributed into that, discussing in very high depth the different assay detectors that we are going to use to screen the different detector materials that we are going to use for future detectors. So I'm not intending at all to go through all those different technology in depth, but I just want to mention that there are 5 different assay detectors that we use for bulk assay or surface assay contamination. The high purity germanium detector, the neutron activation analysis, the ICP-MS, the alpha screening, and the radon emanation. So now for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of skip through some slides, but first of all, I want to say that though the bulk material assay detectors has been sufficient for the current experiments, for the next generation experiment, there were some demands about having the detectors being able to be sensitive to the level of radioactivity at the level of 100 nanobecquerel per kilogram per assay. For most of the detectors, with an exception for Kamlanzen, who wants a much lower detector contamination. But when we think about the current available detector technology, thank you, like for instance, the high purity germanium detector, we realize that the current limit of the detector is about 10 microbecquerel per kilogram. So we need to improve upon that sensitivity if we want to meet the need of the, or the demand rather, of the future generation dark matter or neutrinoless double beta decay detector. But one good thing though is that if we put together all the germanium detector that's available worldwide, we have about 68 of them in the world. And if we think about, the fact that those detectors currently sample like 1 sample every 2 weeks, then it will give us about 1,400 samples that we can assay per year, meaning that if we move into a collaboration between all the low background counting facility in the world, we will have enough high purity germanium detector for bulk assay in the world. We just have then to work on improving the sensitivity of those detectors. And one of the improvements that can be done is, for instance, to do what SURF is doing right now, trying to move toward a multiple crystal high purity germanium detector to be able to improve the sensitivity that way. Another way that can be done is to move toward the ICP-MS technique, but it has his cons, as we all know. But I just wanted to say that the demand of the sensitivity for the future experiment that's at the level of 100 nanobecquerel per kilogram is the current demand for is the current sensitivity for ICP-MS technique, so it can work. But the problem is with this technique is a lot of cons, and one of them is just the sample preparation that is a little bit tricky. And so we have to work, I think, in parallel in using this technique, but improving the high purity germanium detector as well. Now, moving on to the alpha screening and the radon emanation, I want to say that for direct assay of the surface contamination, for instance, the alpha contamination on the detector material during the construction, we can use the XIA detection technique. The current detection technology is at the level of 1 millibecquerel per meter square, which was fine for current detectors like LZ, but for future detectors that require a factor of 1,000 less, we need to find a way to improve upon that technique, and we haven't found it yet. So it's something that we have to be discussing a path forward. And the last thing I want to mention on this assay is the fact that the existing radon emanation facility across the world are enough, but the sensitivity as well need to be improved upon. And it's something, again, that we have to work toward implementing. Now, the third thing I want to mention about the UF4 topical group is that beside the need for low radon reduced clean room and assaying, we have also investigated the need for extra support need, for instance, clean space, not clean space, space rather for material storage, purification plan for liquid scintillation, water, and so forth, and also a facility for detector machining and fabrication, and facility also for electroplating and electroforming. So this is a very quick summary because of the sake of time, but if you read the report that I have provided on the slide in the link, then you can read a more thorough summary of what we have gotten. So the first thing is that we have enough facility for underground material storage. We have those facilities, though most of them are not clean room, we can turn them into clean room using different ways. We can use impermeable radon bagging system with some purge if needed. We can use a glove box or cabinet with purge system if needed. So we are good in that sense. The second thing about material purification facility, Snow Lab has an example of extensive purification plant for various liquid, for instance, ventilation, water, and so forth. And all other facilities are also working toward having close to the same thing implemented. But the main thing that needs our attention here is the detector fabrication and machining facility. So we know that there are a few facilities for electroplating and electroforming at PNNL and ourselves, and that Bulby and Snow Lab are planning to also build some of those facilities, but we don't have an existing facility for detector fabrication. For instance, the germanium crystal growth underground is not existing at the moment. Another thing is that we have a few machine shop, but we benefit from having more. Since for the future experiment, again, which are more tightened background, we need to machine most of our detector component on the ground to avoid cosmogenic activation. Then we need to improve upon the existing machine shop and so forth. So that being said, then the conclusion for UF4 is on this slide here. I have highlighted in blue what I want you to take home as a message is that some experiments require large and lower reduced radon clean room than currently exist. It may mean that we need to build new clean room or improve upon the radon reduction system of existing clean room. But the constraint is on the size and then the lower radon needed. And also that the most assay need that future experiment will have may be met if we move into collaborating, having a sort of low background counting facility worldwide collaboration where every individual facility own their own detectors, but they make it available for experiment consumption. Yeah, I hope it's clear. If it's not clear, you can ask a question or come tomorrow to our session. And the last bullet point I wanted to highlight, and I did not, is that we need to improve upon infrastructure for detector fabrication and machining for underground, because future experiment, again, we need to do a lot of those machining underground. Now, moving quickly into UF5, that is about synergetic research. The main take-home message here is that beside the dark matter physics and the neutrino physics that is of interest for most of us in this room, underground facility also have different scientific and engineering research activities that are going on. For instance, they have like quantum information science technology, acceleration-based nuclear exoparticle physics, geology and geophysics, and so forth. So the aim of the UF5 or the synergetic research topical group was to ensure that we identify the breadth and the nature of all the scientific and engineering activity going on in underground labs, that we place them in context in terms of need and requirement with all other research effort ongoing, and most of all that we identify the synergy wherever there is synergy, and we identify the conflict as they present themselves in order to make some recommendation. And in the conclusion here, I will say that going through that exercise, no outright conflict in research program was found between those different research activities and the dark matter and the neutrino physics we are interested in. And also that those experiments use the underground facility, not only as we do to escape or to reduce cosmic radiation, but also to sometimes escape noisy environment like seismic noise and atmospheric noise in order to be able to broaden your research goal. So I will end here. And that's all. Thank you.
Test, test. Can you hear me? Test, test, test. Can you hear me? I think it's working. Okay. All right, thank you for your attention. I'm presenting on behalf of the co-conveners for underground facilities and infrastructure. This is a summary. So I won't go through my outline, but this is what I'll be covering in this presentation. Just as a reminder, how we're organized, you probably can infer this from the previous two presentations. We're organized into a number of topical areas, focusing first in UF 1 and 2 on the science frontiers and understanding what the requirements are for underground facilities and infrastructure from the science goals that are coming out of those frontiers. We also want to look at the facilities themselves as well as supporting infrastructure, and that's what you see in UF4 and UF5. We also had a charge from the steering committee of SNOMAS to prepare an integrated plan for underground facility use for the future. So this summary presentation is an attempt at beginning that process. I want to begin with a sort of a personal anecdote. So I'm going a little off script here. So this is a personal story. So earlier this week, Steve Ritz commented on DUSEL in the context of programmatic changes. For those who are unaware, DUSEL is the Deep Underground Science and Engineering Laboratory. This was an activity that the community was pursuing around 2010. And that's pre-SNOMAS 2013, so important to know that timeline. Now, Steve prefaced this comment with the statement, trigger warning. And it's interesting, I had to go back and listen to the recorded presentation to hear what he said, because I had a visual reaction to it. What he said was entirely benign, and yet his statement that it was a trigger warning was absolutely correct. And the reason why was because this was the headline that we were facing at that time. It was a real gut punch. Now, that headline aside, a decade on, we are doing great science in underground facilities. I really want to get that across to people. The conversation today is not about a dearth of underground labs. Conversation today is about how do we effectively perform all the science that we want to do with the facilities where we're investing. So let me get right to that. What is the science that we want to do, and what are the facilities that we need to think about? Key in front of us is the flagship HEP neutrino science program recommended by the 2014 P5 recommendations. The science here is captured by the neutrino frontier, and underground facilities and infrastructure are crucial for the success of the deep underground neutrino experiment, DUNE. Other key programs of underground physics, direct detection of dark matter. Of course, you've just seen this in the previous presentations. Here, searches for particle-like dark matter from the MEV to TeV masses use a broad range of different types of experiments, all located in underground facilities. Here, the science is captured by the cosmic frontier, in particular topical group CF1. And again, underground facilities and infrastructure are crucial for success of this science. We note that there are other underground programs that take advantage of these facilities. Neutrinos double beta decay is a specific one. Now, this is supported by nuclear physics. The ton scale program will be active into the 2030s, and the research expertise and infrastructure requirements have significant overlap with direct detection dark matter. As Alvin noted, there are other research programs sharing underground laboratory space. I've listed them here. I will not speak to them at any length. Let's look back. We want to look back at SNOMAS 2013 and assess where we were and where we've come to. The underground laboratory capabilities portion of SNOMAS 2013 produced a report, and in that report, they covered a number of things and had 4 conclusions, which I show here. Oops. And Looking at these, I will not read them, I will let you do that. But when I look at these, the key thing from our perspective is to assess where we are. So when I look at these are the snowmass report conclusions. Green check means we've either done it or we're doing it now. We're on our way. With the one exception being this last one, which is related to building the largest scale of dark matter and neutrinoless double beta decay experiments to ensure continued US strong role in these science programs. We should also review the recommendations from P5 in 2014, which stem from the work that was done at the SNOMAS 2013 process and meeting. There was one related to Dune LBNF, that's R13, and two related to direct detection of dark matter. So again, the point is to assess, have we done these? Is there anything left we need to do? And where are we today? Again, a green check mark is we've either checked it off and we're doing it now. Or in the case of the orange star, is there something left for us to do? And here I'll pause just briefly and mention that recommendation 20 from P5 back in 2014 says support one or more third generation direct detection experiments guided by the results of preceding searches, seek a globally complementary program and increase international partnership in G3 experiments. So I think that, looking at these conclusions and recommendations from the 2013, 2014 process, seeing what we've done and then seeing what maybe left needs to be done starts to get us to thinking about how we plan for the next decade, the next snowmass period. Let me briefly just reiterate the sort of breadth of underground facilities that are available for doing our science. This figure from Clarence Virtue shows a number of the underground laboratories around the world. The green and black are operating, and there are plans for future facilities, underground facilities, in gray. Surf is, of course, in the US and is where that major infrastructure investment is being made for Dune. When we as researchers doing our work in underground facilities think about facilities, this slide from Jared Heiss does a very good job of capturing the types of things that we think about as key for assessing the utility of underground facilities in the work that we do. In addition to listing what underground facilities can provide here, you can see an assessment of current laboratories, their space, size of the circles, the depth associated with the locations, which is effectively a metric for the amount of cosmic ray reduction you experience, and the locations around the world. And so when you start thinking about, I have an idea for a next generation underground experiment, you immediately begin thinking, where should I put this? Where can I put this? So at this point, if I was in a science frontier, I would say, what's the future program? I would tell you about the science that we're going to be doing in the next decade. UF, underground facilities, is a supporting frontier. Thus, when we think about what we need to do, we're thinking about what are the science programs where underground facilities provide the necessary infrastructure. We look to neutrino frontier, cosmic frontier, and rare processes and precision frontier as the science frontiers that we provide support for. We need to hear from you. We're doing this work to understand the facilities, but we need to hear from you in terms of what the science needs are and what the facility needs are so that we can document those for P5. I will share with you what we've heard in high-level summary so far, but we need your feedback to make sure that we've understood correctly. And so that's where we are now. we have some draft observations for underground facilities and infrastructure related to the US HEP program. Underground facilities have enabled a leading role for US scientists in the most exciting underground scientific results in the last decade. Many future scientific opportunities require significant underground facilities in the next decade. Development of Dune at SURF is the single largest US investment in underground facilities and infrastructure. Generally, underground facilities are fully subscribed with operating and scheduled next generation experiments through the 2020s. The scale of experimental plans for the late 2020s and beyond will outgrow existing underground facilities and infrastructure. Large-scale underground experiments require substantial preparation of underground facilities prior to experimental construction. We note that the dune excavation for the FAR detectors 3 and 4 is an underground facility opportunity for beneficial utilization prior to the full dune program. These are observations. Our draft conclusions, which we are working on and still requesting your feedback in improving and clarifying these, are as follows. Support the US underground facilities to ensure success and completion of Dune, the flagship HEP neutrino program for the coming decades. When we consider the Cosmic Frontiers priorities requiring underground facilities and the 2014 P5 recommendations, R&D and decision-making for a Generation 3 direct detection dark matter program should commence to enable a construction start around 2030. We should ensure the health of scientific programs in underground facilities by supporting the enabling capabilities, technique development, and the expertise required for underground experiments. Through domestic and international interagency engagement, seek to ensure both full utilization and necessary expansion planning of underground facilities to support US high energy physics priorities. Toward completion, what do we have to do? We have reports in draft form, and we're seeking community feedback. We know that we will need to complete these after the Seattle snowmass. Consistency with the science frontiers is very important for us and is a key final step. I believe that we've actually achieved that in this week. I think it's one of the great benefits of gathering here together this week. Our planned output from the frontier, 5 topical reports, and 1 short executive summary frontier report. Please work with us to ensure that facility and infrastructure needs for current and future underground research are documented. The purpose here is to provide an up-to-date reference for P5. And that's the end of my presentation, and we will move this to questions and discussion. Thank you for your attention. Okay, we are in question and discussion. Are there questions from the audience?
Hi, Maurice Garcia Severes from Berkeley Lab. I was just wondering, there's maybe, there was a lot of emphasis, rightly so, on the large experiments, future experiments, but there's also a number of small experiments that can sort of fit in many places. But the hosting of those experiments is somehow tied to funding, and so where they go doesn't only depend on where there's underground space, but where they can get support. So there's kind of an interplay between support and host and location. And I wonder if you've explored that interplay. I mean, people will basically stay in the US if they can be supported, but they'll go elsewhere if the US doesn't support them, essentially for small experiments, or the support is delayed. So putting money into building more facilities is great, but if you don't pay for the experiments to go in the facilities, then they won't get used.
I concur. I'm going to take that as a comment. Was there a specific question?
Well, the question was whether it's addressed in your report.
Yeah, we plan on talking about this in the report. There will be, of course, more detail underneath our bullet points that describe what the situation is in terms of both large scale, which drives facilities, and also smaller scale experiments, which sort of drive total square footage that's needed.
Thank you. Very interesting talk. You have presented the inspiring map of many facilities overseas. Some of them, I suppose, are large. And question is, which of them is the most productive or the biggest? And what is the most fascinating recent, I would say, scientific output from these facilities?
You're asking me to step into a fight about who's best. I'm going to attempt to avoid that, but answer your question anyways. You can have, a statement about the most underground facility space. If you look back at one of the slides that I have in here, I'm going to try to remember this just from my, knowledge. LNGS in Italy is quite large, but the expanded CJPL, which is in China, Jinping, will be the most square footage. You asked a question about, who is the most productive. I would take that as a question about number of scientific papers or importance of results. I'm not going to weigh in on that. All of the laboratories are doing excellent research. That was the point I was trying to make in my early sort of personal assessment of where we are now compared to where we were maybe a decade ago.
Can you say a little bit more about how these facilities are actually funded? Personally, to me, it's not really clear.
How they are funded.
Yes.
To be honest, I cannot. It is not something that I particularly work on. I would actually look to representatives from those laboratories who are here to actually contribute to this. Would either Jeter or Jarrett or Mike like to try to answer this question? This is a discussion session, so.
So Jared Heiss, SURF. The statement for SURF is pretty straightforward. Our operating budget is funded through DOE HEP. We do have a few other sources of funding beyond that, but the lion's share is high energy physics.
And do the experiments then pay you, or you just decide to house them and for free?
Generally, they don't. In some cases, they require dedicated resources. Say they want 90% of an engineer for several years, in which case there will be some funding from the experiment translated into, let's try this. Some experiments require dedicated resources from SURF, let's say an engineer for several years. That will be negotiated in a contract and paid from the experiment to the laboratory. But in general, the laboratory operations are supported by DOE, and we don't rebill or charge any of the experiments.
No rent or anything?
No rent, no. And to be honest, we're moving into the direction to become a U.S. Department of Energy user facility, in which case good science doesn't pay. That's how that model operates, and we're currently really operating in that mode right now.
Okay, thanks.
Jeter?
So for Snow Lab, the funding is split between the federal and provincial governments, about 80%, 20%. And citing an experiment in Snow Lab is a competitive process that is open to everyone. So we try to select the best experiments simply.
Hi. I have a question on your conclusion number 2. You hopefully recall. The first one is fairly clear. Of course, Dune should be supported and the underground facilities for that. The second point was about a direct dark matter detection experiment. But it was sort of a rather abstract point. So just to be sure what you mean, do you propose that such an experiment, Generation 3 experiment, should be hosted at SURF, or should there be another deep underground lab in the US, or are you going to do this abroad? What was really the gist of point 2?
So point 2, I'll remind people, is if you look at the priorities for the cosmic frontier requiring underground facilities, i.e. direct detection dark matter, and you consider the yet to complete recommendations from P5 in 2014, it is about a G3 experiment that the US physics community can have leadership in. If you dig into the report from 2014, it points to placing that facility in the US.
And okay, and then zooming in the US means for you, SURF?
That's currently the US facility that's being invested in, yes. Are there other questions? If not, of course, we are all available for further discussion. We have another session tomorrow and the following day in the parallels in the mornings. We do appreciate everyone contributing to the development of our reports, and we hope to talk with you. Thank you very much for your attention.